session of ERA feasibility study. Julia.
So I'll just actually turn it pretty quickly over to our consultants, Nick and Elaine. Nick, I'm sorry, Popnik, and Elaine Howard.
Yes, thank you.
And Elaine Howard, they're going to present sort of the first crack at the analysis. And you received the PowerPoint presentation last week, and like I said, in that this is the first. There will be another meeting scheduled where they will present sort of their final analysis, as well as we'll discuss strategies on whether and how to move forward. So with that, I will let Nick and Elaine take it away.
Great, and I think I was planning on sharing my screen, so I'd be advancing the slides. But does somebody need to give me permission to do that at this point?
Brad, I assume he can just do the share screen, or do you need to give permission?
Nick, on the bottom of your screen, there's a box that says share. Do you see it? Where you're muting yourself and where your camera is, the third box says share.
Perfect. Okay. All right, so we will see if that works.
I accidentally pressed that, so I may be accidentally sharing my screen, so bear with me while my, okay, now you can try that, Nick.
Okay, hang on 1 second. I have to adjust my privacy settings, apparently. Just 1 second. My computer keeps giving me a privacy message preventing me from doing it. So I am not sure if we may have someone else share their screen with the presentation as we go through this.
Brad, would you be able to, I think that you have that as a backup. Can you share your screen and then they can just tell you to?
Yeah, and if not, this is Elaine, I can try sharing mine.
I don't.
Oh.
Go grab it.
Well, Elaine, why don't?
Yeah,
why don't you go ahead and share yours, Elaine? Perfect.
Okay, great. And I'm hearing a little bit of feedback on this, or echo. Is anyone else hearing an echo?
No, but I think if everybody goes mute except for you guys, that might help. So.
Okay, perfect. So sorry about the technical issues there. We'll hopefully get through the PowerPoint pretty quickly here, and then have plenty of time for City Council discussion. So we were here a little over a month ago, virtually, back in April. And at that presentation, we did sort of an Urban Renewal 101, where Elaine gave the lowdown on how urban renewal works. We then gave an overview of the next steps on this project and asked for your input on the potential boundaries that we were going to be analyzing through this project. Since that last meeting, we did update our boundaries per your input. And along those same lines, we projected future growth and assessed value in each of these boundary areas and projected the financial capacity that's there. And identified project costs. So this slide that's up right now, which is actually from a slightly older version of the PowerPoint, as that red box is indicating, though I think all other slides are up to date here. That's just showing the overview of the city the 3 new areas, and then the yellow tan parcels in the center representing the existing urban renewal boundary. The red parcels are the area overlapping between the new study areas and the existing one. Just as a reminder, the statutory limits on urban renewal does not allow the city to include all 3 of these new urban renewal areas and the existing urban renewal area. It's going to be too many acres. And so as we move forward and as we get to our next meeting with you, likely next month, we'll be talking about some strategies for how the city could move forward with implementing any of these new urban renewal areas and what sorts of revisions to the existing boundary would need to take place in order to accommodate that. If we go to the next slide where we're showing boundary number 1, this is on the eastern side of the city. Our forecast of financial capacity, we're going to go into in a second, really deals with future growth in assessed value. So that's our first step, is forecasting that future growth in value. That's going to come from both appreciation of existing property as well as exception value from new construction. And we break this forecast down into 2 pieces: a short-term outlook, which considers very specific development sites in the near future, and then we'll, in just a second, talk about more long-term forecasts. So what we're showing now are the short-term projects that are anticipated to develop in this proposed urban renewal boundary over the next 4 years. And each of these projects are estimated to add somewhere between $800,000 and $35 million of assessed value to the tax rolls. You can see all told, if these projects came to fruition, they'd be adding $77 million of assessed value to the tax roll. So there are a handful of projects here, and some of them are particularly high in value. City staff could provide additional detail on the specifics of any of these projects, but it does show that this area is primed for several large-scale construction projects to begin. One of those projects, I'm not sure if it's Cyfle Industrial Park, is actually currently under construction. The others are planned for construction in future years and in various stages of getting ready for that construction to happen. So these specific projects are included in our analysis going forward, though for the largest project, the Harsh property, given that it is a little bit less certain and further out in time, we do have different scenarios where we show all of that value, half of that value, or none of that value coming on the tax rolls in these upcoming years here. So once we look at that short-term forecast, we then also had these 3 scenarios, low, medium, and high, projecting growth in the future in assessed value. And the growth rates that we looked at for this analysis ranged from 4% to 6% growth in assessed value each year. Given the way that our assessed value system works in the state, we're really looking at the 3% growth, 3% growth each year from appreciation of existing property. Anything above 3% needs new construction to make it happen. And so that's that second row of this table here, average assessed value from new construction. And that's showing how much new value would need to be added to the tax rolls each year in order to achieve the growth rates that we have shown in this forecast. So for this particular urban renewal area, just as an example, if it were to have 4% growth per year long term, it would need to have about $1.2 million of new assessed value coming on the tax rolls each year from new construction activity. And citywide and countywide, I think we discussed in the last city council presentation that the average historical growth in assessed value here has been between 4 and 5%. So in between our low and medium scenarios, the high scenario would show faster growth in this area than the city has been experiencing as a whole long term.
And just to be clear, your historical growth rate percentage, what window of time are you taking that from?
Yeah, so we looked over a decade, going back before the last recession. I can't remember if it was 16 or 17 years worth of data that we looked at. But that trend, that between 4 and 5%, you can pick a lot of, time series, whether you're looking at the last 5 years, the last 10, or the last 15, and you'll still get a number that's between 4 and 5% growth. There are certainly periods of time where it outpaces that and is growing at greater than 5% per year. And the depths of the last recession, it did drop below that. But over any extended period of time, that has been the growth rate that the city and county have experienced. So with those projections, and this growth is, again, long-term, so it's we start it in 2026 after we have those other short-term projects coming on the tax rolls. We then forecast the financial capacity of the area. And we show this in 3 different numbers here. So the first one is total net TIF. That ranges from 61 million to 109 million. That is the total tax revenue that we estimate this urban renewal area would receive over a 30-year period. That is a helpful number, but that number fails to account for the fact that you're not going to be spending every one of those dollars on new projects. You're going to be spending a lot of that on debt service, and that debt service is going to have an interest component to it. And so if you really want to look at how much you have available to spend on capital projects in the area, we have to back out the amount that'll be spent on interest over the life of the urban renewal area. That gets us to that next row of maximum indebtedness, which ranges from 51 million to 92 million in these projections. And that maximum indebtedness figure that's a term that's in the state statutes, and that is the limiting factor that you are required to have in your plan. And that is effectively the spending limit on total project costs over the life of the urban renewal area.
Hey, Nick, this is Tim Rosner. When you forecast out, you mentioned that with the 4% growth rate, the 1.2 million a year in growth to achieve that above the 3%. Did you just forecast that out 1.2 all the way through, or did you front load with the known projects that we see out there?
So these scenarios all have those known projects in the early years, though again, the harsh property, which is the largest short-term development potential, we actually don't include any of that value in the low scenario, the 4% scenario. But the other projects are all included. They are showing to come on the tax rolls over the next several years. And then starting in 2026 and beyond is when we switch over to this percentage-based growth, where we are no longer forecasting specific projects, but just increasing at a 4% per year.
Okay, I was just curious how you did that. Great, thanks.
Yep. So maximum indebtedness, very helpful figure, and the figure that's required to go into any new urban renewal plan that you would adopt. But that maximum indebtedness figure is specifically stated in future dollars, in year of expenditure dollars. And so if you're getting a lot of these dollars 10, 20 years from now, the value of those dollars is going to be a lot less in real terms than they are today. And so the last number that we show here in bold, where we say capacity in 2020 dollars, is where we've taken that maximum indebtedness, adjusted it for inflation, and we're showing the true purchasing power of this urban renewal area in today's dollars. And so go ahead.
I apologize. What was the discount rate used for that net present value calculation?
Just 3%, which when you're looking at 30 years, historically that's been about right. Looking forward in terms of a crystal ball, we've had much lower inflation rates recently, but there is also projections for very rapid inflation in coming years. Overall, we just try to use 3% as a sort of a baseline projection. It could certainly be higher or lower.
Is now joining.
Okay, thanks.
And so with that, we are looking at total capacity in 2020 dollars, ranging from around $30 million to $50 million in this urban renewal area, based on how much future growth and new construction activity the area sees. That is, again, for a 30-year period of time, and there's no magic number for 30 years. You could keep an urban renewal area open for any amount of time. So what we do after that bold number is we break that financial capacity down into 5-year chunks. And so we can see it's not all available on day one, but if we're looking in the low scenario, for example, it's about $5 million of capacity that the area would have every 5 years. And so if 30 years gets us roughly $30 million of capacity, if you wanted to go with a 20 or 25-year plan, you'd be looking at more like $20 to $25 million of financial capacity. And those numbers, again, are higher for the medium and high forecasts that we've done here. So that was a lot to sort of lay the parameters of how these financial summary tables work. But this slide has all that information packed into it fairly densely, and it shows the range of financial projections that we have in this urban renewal area. The next slide shows the same information just for that medium 5% scenario, but sort of visualizing it on a chart might be a little easier to sort of follow how this could look in reality. So the gray area, the gray shaded area, is showing the amount of TIF revenue each year over time. And the blue bars are showing what that translates to in terms of the ability to spend money on projects in today's dollars over time. And so we can see that through incurring debt in the early years, you'd be able to take out some fairly significant projects in the $3 to $5 million range, but you'd be borrowing so that you'd have resources above and beyond the annual revenue that's coming in. And in future years, then you're spending less money than you're bringing in each year because you've already obligated a chunk of your revenue to pay the debt service on that long term. And this is sort of a typical pattern that you would see for an urban renewal area, where every 5 or 6 years you've had increased capacity that allows you to take on new debt and fund a significant chunk of new projects. And then in the interim years, you have a much lower level of spending capacity as you're just spending the additional cash above and beyond what you need for debt service. So, so we looked at in the financial capacity and saw that we had somewhere between $30 to $50 million of financial capacity, depending on the growth in assessed value in this area over time, and depending on how long you'd like to keep an urban renewal area open for. This is a list of high priority projects that city staff have come up with for what those funds could be spent on. And one thing that we see here is that the total project costs here are generally in line with the medium growth, 5% growth scenario. So this is showing that for this particular urban renewal area, when we look at the infrastructure needs here, they are relatively in line with our revenue projections for this area. If there's any specific questions on these projects and what they entail, I think I will have to defer to city staff to handle the project specifics.
And I'll just chime in real quick and maybe answer questions that you might have. So the project list was taken from our TEA implementation plan for the TEA projects and our transportation system plan. Obviously, some of the TSP projects don't, they might be funded through other sources, but we just wanted to put them all in here for this look.
Right, because it's the projects. This is a living, potentially, if this goes forward, it's a living document. Projects can be removed, added, changed. The only overriding issue is the maximum indebtedness of the district.
Right. We wanted to put in kind of all, like almost the worst case scenario in our minds so that we would be able to determine whether or not the URA was going to be sufficient to do what it needed to do. But ultimately, yeah, we can add, move, do partial, whatever as we move forward.
Yeah, because we don't want to go into the narrative, because I could talk about this list and its completeness or not for an hour, but
yeah, because we can use those monies to go after opportunity grants, all kinds of fun stuff.
Right. Yes.
Right. And discuss if the urban renewal district does an infrastructure project that developers have to pay development fees towards, then where do those development fees go? All that good stuff. So that's another conversation for another day. But just, it's important for folks to say, okay, here is a potential list. I wouldn't ever call it even my out of the gate list, but it's good to know that there is good potential with this proposed boundary for a district.
So before we move on to the projections for the other two proposed boundaries, just, this is kind of the time for open discussion on this, what we presented so far. And the questions that we had teed up were, do folks feel like these projections might be too conservative or aggressive? Is there anything that, causes a red flag for any city councilors? And then, are these the right projects? Although I've actually just heard from folks here that we know these aren't the right projects. This is a starting list of projects, and that there needs to be significant more conversations about ultimately what projects would be funded here.
So I do have a question. It kind of goes back to that capacity summary. You mentioned that you front loaded the projects that we know about. In terms of that 5% growth, though, does that include the front loaded projects, or then we have to get 5% year over year after we front load those?
Yeah, so we actually, those front loaded projects, I believe that we only grow, once they come on the tax roll, we only grow them at 3% per year, reflecting the fact that they have been developed and they're not going to develop again in this time frame. And so they're only going to get the 3% maximum allowed appreciation. It is the remainder of property in the area that we apply these percentages to reflect that there is additional development opportunity here, but we just haven't pinpointed it to a specific property in a specific time frame.
Okay, that helps. I do worry a little bit about a lot of that land out there because it is so hard to develop because there's not a lot of topsoil. Julie, I don't know what your thoughts are on that, but in terms of expecting that kind of growth.
Well, it's a chicken and the egg, right? I mean,
Right.
if we don't support those, they're not going to develop, so we need to kind of strategize what we can do to help facilitate their development so that we can do more facilitation. I have a question, sort of, so what their question is, do the projects feel, or are the projects right? And I guess I hear what we're saying as far as this isn't the list. We tried to put everything in there that we thought could possibly be funded. Are we missing anything? I mean, I guess I want to see if that project cost number, and maybe we get to this if we move forward with an actual URA plan. But I'm just wondering, I want to know whether or not our project costs are too low, or if that seems about right.
So it's important to differentiate that even if we pick a maximum indebtedness of this district and move forward and say somewhere between 5 and 6%, $80 million, it doesn't mean that we end up doing that much in projects. We're not bound to do that much in projects. We could lower that number. A future council can lower that number, or even say we're done spending and all, future increases gets distributed. Correct?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm working with Columbia County right now on their urban renewal area that was adopted almost 20 years ago with a $33 million maximum indebtedness. And they are preparing to close that down right now, leaving $15 million of maximum indebtedness unspent. And that's because they were able to do the projects identified in their plan with other sources. The private sector came through and decided to fund some road improvements on their own, for example. And that prevented the urban renewal area from having to pay for that project. And they're happy with that and happy to close it down ahead of schedule and at lower cost to the affected taxing districts.
Right. And then the maximum time frame for a district is 30 years.
So, Elaine, maybe you talk about timeframes and what is and isn't required in plans here.
So am I on? Can you hear me?
Yep.
Okay, good. So there is no requirement for a time frame in an urban renewal area. Nick and I have to look at time frames in terms of projecting financial feasibility. So that's why we use those time frames. But you are not required to put a specific duration provision into your urban renewal plan. Some communities decide they want to, and that's a community by community decision, but it's not required.
So then the state law amendment is you can't add additional indebtedness once you establish a debt limit or yeah.
You may increase your maximum indebtedness, but doing it is called a substantial amendment, and that requires going through the exact same procedure as adopting an original urban renewal plan and consulting and conferring with the taxing districts. And you're limited to only 20% of your original maximum indebtedness as adjusted annually for inflation, unless you get taxing districts to agree to go above that limit. So there are restrictions on how much you may increase, and it is another lengthy process.
So I mean, it's all because of Portland and their horribly huge, never-ending districts that's in place. It became an issue. I really didn't. That's even more flexibility than I thought was allowed now. But to Julia's question, are there things being missed? Absolutely. You're not putting the public works facility in there on that list. That was a big missing item. I don't know what it would cost. But the idea of relocating public works is on everyone's mind at some point. And yes, I understand that other districts could object, but we can cross that hurdle if we want to.
Mm-hmm.
Tim mentioned a couple others.
Yeah, I'm going back and looking at it. Of course, with the public works building too, we can potentially pay for that by selling the other property or pay for parts of it.
Right. That's why at this point it's just a wish list of maybes, and it can change between now and if it's formed, and even after it's formed, you can completely scrap a list and make a new list.
Right.
Would that include the potential of moving the field house as well?
For me, yeah, certainly in the conversation.
Or yeah, it doesn't necessarily have to move to where the new public works facility would be.
So this is, Elaine, just a short comment on that, and we covered it in the last meeting, and I won't go into it in much detail, but...
I already talked about it.
Pardon me?
I already hinted at the fact that other districts can complain, and some districts don't like public facilities, and we've done it in the past, and I'm quite confident we'll do it in the future.
We just have to get, 3 of the 5 to agree if we did that.
Yep.
So any other comments or discussion on the results for boundary option 1 before we move on to the projections for boundary 2?
Are you going to, and maybe it's for the next meeting, this would put us over our limit if we had the existing one, right? So have you done any of the analysis of how much we can free up from the existing URA? Or is that the next meeting? I think.
Yeah, so we'll discuss that at the next meeting. We've looked into it, and it's a significant question to tackle on its own. So we're mapping not only where all of the public rights of way are and tax exempt properties are inside the existing urban renewal area, but then also mapping the remaining taxable property based on high to low assessed value per acre. So we can try to identify as much low-hanging fruit as possible and just see if there's any configuration that could be pulled out to free up enough acreage for the new urban renewal area while protecting enough assessed value to take care of the financial obligations for the existing one. So we'll definitely delve into that deeper in the next meeting.
Yeah, and there's lots of land to consider removing from phase one here that we just reviewed, I think it's on its face, it's just too big.
So would this project in this boundary area, could it potentially include anything to do with expanding the library or anything like that? Is that the wrong area?
The library, if you're talking about City Hall, that's not in any of the proposed URA areas. So it's currently in the URA, but that will be going away in a few years, and it's not included in any of the boundaries that we're looking at.
Okay, thank you.
And I think if I understand that right, just a reminder, the projects have to be within the boundary, correct?
Yes.
Yeah.
All right, thanks.
Skipping ahead, but the one potential thing when we get to point 3 or area 3 is doing a cherry stem connecting 1 and 3 so that 3 is viable. But we can talk about it 3.
Yeah, that's a great point, and you're right. It will definitely come up when we're talking about the results for 3.
Yeah. And Keith, I think you alluded to this, but in this particular boundary 1, there might be some properties in there that just from the geography, they're very low probability that they're going to get developed that we might want to exclude too.
Right.
I think we also talked at our previous meeting about potentially doing a cherry stem between 2 and 3 as an option.
Right.
Yep.
It'll be harder, but it's, yeah.
We did that, it'd be a dumbbell.
So for boundary 2, maps on the screen, it is larger in size than the version we showed you at the last meeting. As we responded to your feedback, suggesting areas that we could bring in that would have some additional assessed value and development opportunity, and to jumpstart the urban renewal area's financial capacity in the early years. The next slide goes over our short-term development assumptions here. And it is a shorter list of projects than in Boundary 1 and a much lower value list of projects than in Boundary 1. So we're looking at London Estates, residential development, 13 proposed new homes coming on the tax rolls over the next few years, and then an office building as well, talking about potentially 2 stories, medical and dental offices. Not particularly large value projects, but still something that will be coming online on the tax rolls in the next few years here.
So, Julia, is the London Estates project, is that parcel that's just off the Pinehurst cul-de-sac?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
They've changed the names. They keep changing the name on me.
That's correct. Yes.
Del Boca Vista.
Yes.
Yeah, they're trying to distance themselves from that.
So in our financial projections here, again, we went with 4, 5, and 6% for the long-term growth rates for the low, medium, and high scenarios. These would translate to roughly $1 million, $2 million, and $3 million of new construction value being added to the tax rolls each year. That's when we get beyond the short-term outlook that we have. This area we forecast would be able to generate between $30 and $53 million of TIF revenue over a 30-year period. And the maximum indebtedness there would range from $26 million to $46 million. And when we convert that back into today's dollars, accounting for inflation, we're looking at financial capacity between 14 million and 24 million in this area. That capacity is roughly half of the financial capacity that we were showing in Boundary 1. And the major difference between the financial capacity here versus in Boundary 1 is the short-term development opportunities. So Boundary 1 just has so many more potential projects over the next few years with so much more assessed value that it can really jumpstart that area. And we don't see the same dynamics going on here in Boundary 2.
Nick, can I just pause for a second, and maybe we'll get to this at the end, but the timing of things is really important too, because if in boundary one, if those areas develop and come on the tax rolls before we form a boundary, then we don't get the increment from that. So keep that in mind, that the timing of when we form a URA in any of these areas is going to be important in terms of if we delay, we're not going to get as much increment if there's things that are coming online.
The understatement of the meeting.
Yeah.
So thank you for that, Julia. What is the trigger? What's the like? Is it when the occupancy certificate is issued? What triggers it's now in the rolls?
Yeah. So the year in which the certificate of occupancy is issued, the assessor will then pick it up on January 1st of the following year, and that will come on the tax roll the following October when they put out their tax rolls. So we do have a bit of a lag time, and that means that the industrial park that's under construction right now and that we anticipate will finish construction this year, it will be first reflected on the tax roll for fiscal year ending 22. So that's $12 million of assessed value, and if you wanted to capture that increment in any new urban renewal area, you would need to have your urban renewal plan adopted before October of next year. And it's a lengthy process to adopt an urban renewal plan. So you'd really be looking probably, I don't know, Elaine, when would they be needing to start a process of adopting a plan or creating a plan if they wanted to have it effective before next October?
I think now I'm telling people 6 to 8 months for the actual adoption of a plan. So if you go through this feasibility study and say to proceed 6 to 8 months from then, you could have a plan in place. So you ought to be able to meet that October 2021 date with no problem.
Okay. Thank you for that.
So these are, again, just a visualization of the Boundary 2 financial capacity, similar looking pattern with large borrowings taking place every few years and smaller amounts in between. But these numbers are just lower across the board, and the growth in the early years is a slower slope than it is in Boundary 1 there. So there's definitely not, under this forecast, the availability to invest heavily in big ticket items early on in this proposed urban renewal area. The next slide shows our project costs. And again, this is the sort of the wish list of all the projects that are happening here. One thing, it looks like there is a repeat of a project on the list, the Cedar Creek Trail Crossing. That's just because some very key words got left off of this slide. So the lower dollar amount there is for an undercrossing. The higher dollar amount is for an overcrossing. I believe it's 2 separate design options for the same project. Again, the city staff can tell you more about any of the individual projects on the list. But the key thing is that these projects add up to over $60 million in cost. And when we're looking at our financial capacity, we're talking about capacity between 14 and 24 million here over a 30-year period. So this area certainly has significantly higher needs than urban renewal is projected to be able to provide for on its own.
So on the project list, the Cedar Creek Trail Crossing 99, that number, who came up with the undercrossing number? Because the tunnel has never been priced so low.
I believe that came from the feasibility study, but I'm not 100% positive off the top of my head. So yeah, those numbers are low, but I think that's where that came from.
Then another question. So one potential project on this list is the Cedar Brook Way extension. If you go to the map of the Boundary 2, if that extension was done, it makes a lot of property very much,
Easy to develop.
yes.
Mhm.
And the similar thing would be said for the Forest Creek Drive extension. So how is that development, potential development number reflected in your calculation?
So right now our forecast for the potential is really just looking at the range of growth rates between 4 and 6%, and recognizing, and it sounds like the types of projects that you'd like to invest in here could open up the area for significant new development. And if we're saying that probably feels more like a 6% growth scenario or something, where you're seeing, each year on average, several $1 million of new construction activity occurring in the area, then, perhaps we want to adjust the growth scenarios that we look at here. So, we'd certainly love any input you have on your thoughts on the development potential here, and we can talk with staff afterwards and decide whether we want to adjust these growth rates that are shown here, because perhaps the spectrum that we've shown is too low for the true development capacity out here.
Right. Again, with those two road projects, it is creating substantial opportunity. Granted, landowners have rights to do what they want, and they may not agree to support the projects, but I think if they're put on this list, I think they'd be crazy not to be very supportive. So I would do the 6%. If that's kind of the range of what's allowed, I'd be looking at the 6% growth rate for this boundary 2, and then work on a total project valuation adjustment, and then work on the project lists.
So
If the other thing on the projects, if the YMCA expansion is a project we would consider, and I'm not saying yay or nay on that at all, wouldn't that the boundary have to be adjusted around that plot?
Yes.
Right,
Yeah.
and we didn't change that originally just because since it's tax exempt, it doesn't have any impact on our actual financial projections here. But you're right from a project perspective.
We should probably make that change just on the off chance we go that route.
Any other thoughts or comments when looking at this area and recognizing that there is a bit of a mismatch, even if we go and look at something closer towards that 6% scenario where we've got projections of $24 million of financial capacity. And this area, when we're looking at our list of projects here, is, in the $60 to $70 million range. Do folks have thoughts on any priorities for the projects here, or which ones are, most important, or any thoughts on whether there might be other funding tools that could be combined with urban renewal to make these projects whole and to make this a successful area?
I think it's the same conversation we had with the TEA. I mean, there's, you can get matching dollars from various sources. I think it's just a starting point at this point in my mind. I just realized something, and maybe it's too late, but I'm going to throw it out there. But do we want to extend this boundary to include the new, where Hops and Drops is and all that? Because we have that big parcel in there that a hotel could go into that's gotten a lot of interest. Just throwing it out there.
I think that would bring in, well, I mean, we can look at that absolutely, but that would bring in quite a bit more acreage, and
It would have to be a cherry. It'd have to be a cherry stem to only the hotel pad if that was added. In my opinion.
Yeah, that's kind of what I was thinking. That could bring a lot of I think
The bigger idea potentially is actually the barbecue joint land.
yes, that's the other one. Where the Camp Bow Wow's going.
Yeah. Also known
Yeah,
as.
or get both.
Right. So something to look at. Yep.
All right. Any more discussion on boundary 2 before we move on to the third and final boundary? Okay, so boundary 3, shown here, north end of town, the smallest of the boundaries that we are looking at, significant overlap with the existing urban renewal area. And for this particular urban renewal or proposed boundary, we don't have any short-term identified specific projects. So we're only looking at these long-term growth projections for financial capacity. And in addition to the 4, 5, and 6% growth scenarios that we looked at on the others, this one also shows a just 3% scenario. That 3% scenario is to really show, well, what if nothing develops in this area until after you've raised all of your urban renewal funds in order to build the transportation infrastructure that would be the catalyst for new development taking place here. And so here we're looking at a total TIF that ranges from 7 to 17 million, maximum indebtedness between 6 and 15 million, and then actual capacity in today's dollars ranging from 3 to 8 million. But a lot of that capacity does not become available until later years. The timing shown here shows, again, this series of loans that will be taking place over the life of the urban renewal area. That's based on sort of generic urban renewal plan assumptions. But as we get to the next slide on project costs, there really is only one project that's been identified here. So in reality, you wouldn't be taking small bites at your financing over time, but you'd probably be waiting to save up until you actually have the full amount of funding or the full amount of capacity to borrow enough to pay for that project. And we can make those tweaks in a financing plan down the road as this gets continue to be refined. But that's the projections here. There does look like there's enough capacity in the long term to fund this project. The question really just relates to, would there be any way to accelerate the timing of this funding so that you could pay for that project sooner rather than later? And traditional urban renewal financing, where it's standing on its own 2 feet, it's based on the amount of tax revenue you collected the previous year, and your bankers are going to want to get steady payments every single year. They're going to want to have a relatively short time frame, between 10 to 20 years at the most. Those kinds of financing terms would make it very challenging to finance this size of a project, given the revenues that this area is projected to have.
Yeah. So I go back to my comment before. 3 is dead in my book. As a standalone, I would do a cherry stem with 1 that's going to, because unless a lot of original urban renewal district could be cut back out on 99 and have the original or the existing URA boundary survive, for the next couple of years and shrink. I do a cherry stem of 1 and 3, and be selective on what remnant of the boundary on 3 is used when it's added to 1. Because the plan B is, as Doug hinted, we thought of the idea of a cherry stem from 2 to 3, but if you go to the existing URA boundary, there's a sizable portion of our current boundary crossing 99.
Yeah, and the cherry stem from 1 to 3, also there's just, when we look at our initial project lists and our initial financial capacity, boundary 1 appears to be in a much healthier financial position than boundary 2 anyways. And so boundary 1 would have more ability to chip in and help fund this type of project in boundary 3 sooner rather than later.
Yep. And again, I expect all the projects that are on these lists, few of them would be funded 100% by the district, I think. So that's also encouraging.
Nick and Elaine, for the next meeting, are you guys going to look at different scenarios for even, because obviously all of Boundary 1, even if we take out significant parts of the existing URA, my understanding is all of Boundary 1 still can't be brought in until the current URA is eliminated or whatever, retired. So are you guys going to look at sort of strategic boundary modifications going forward? How is that going to work?
Right, it's not going to be just them. It's going to be a joint because they don't have the perspective that you will, Julia,
Sure.
or council will have. But yes, it has to be shrunk dramatically. There's parts of one that don't need to be on there.
Yeah, so we will do the technical analysis to facilitate that conversation. So we'll identify how many acres would need to be cut out of either the existing or the proposed new one. And we'll show where those acres are easiest to cut from a purely financial perspective from both the existing and the potential new one. And at that point, there's not going to be, I think, one clear answer, but there would be a menu of approaches that could be taken to cut a little here, a little there, until you can make it work. But I think, as everybody on this meeting knows, it will take significant cuts to one or both if we're going to try to have both of them coexist.
Thanks.
And so that's the end of our presentation. Our next steps on this will be to make some amendments to our financial analysis based on the feedback that we received tonight, write up those results in a report that we will distribute to City Council in the coming month here, and then have a final conversation with City Council to go over that report and talk about the real strategic questions of when and how could you create one or more of these urban renewal areas, and the timing of what that would look like. And so that'll be the final meeting and the final conversation. And depending on how that goes, the city may or may not choose to proceed with establishing a new urban renewal plan.
So one comment on the report also with scenario 2, the hotel is not on that list of short-term development assumptions, because that's not going to be on the tax rolls until November of 21. Right, Julia?
I'm just looking at that. You're right. Yeah, so that we can update that that information. I don't know how we missed that. That is being constructed right now, but yeah, based on the timing that that Nick provided, well, I guess
Hotel needs to be on there.
yeah, they're very close to getting their occupancy, so they will be on within the next 2 years, right? Is that Nick? If
they get their occupancy, we'll double check to make sure that they weren't partially assessed last year. But most new sizable construction is able to qualify for exemptions for construction in progress. And so that would mean that they will get their certificate of occupancy this year. The assessor on January 1st will pick up the full amount of that new construction, and it'll be October of 21 when that tax roll is released. So that timing still works for us, and we can certainly factor in that value. And if it's under construction, I'm sure we've got a pretty good estimate of the value for building permits and whatnot.
Yeah.
Perfect.
Awesome. That helped.
Yeah. Good catch.
Yeah. Anything else? And appreciate the hard work and look forward to seeing options of shrinking the existing boundary to meet our needs and how much land that adds, and then adjustments to the proposed 1 with a cherry stem to 3 and then adjustments to 2.
Absolutely.
Awesome. Anything else from anybody for the good of the work session? All right.
Thank you, guys.
You bet. So we'll take a 2-minute break and then we'll start, or 3-minute break, and then we'll start the joint meeting.
And we're still on this same invite, right? For
Yeah.
That's- Yeah.
Okay,
Yes.
so everybody hang here.
Thank you, Nick and Elaine.
Thank you.
who's here?
So the only commissioner I see on right this moment is Commissioner Holm.
Okay.
And then Jean was going to be calling in.
Hi,
Sylvia,
Lori.
Sylvia, are you able to see when someone new is coming on, or how do you want me to?
I can see them when they're waiting in the lobby if it's not just a phone number. Like right now, I see Rick Wydola.
Yes. So he just joined, and he is on the Planning Commission.
Okay.
Okay, you guys ready? Should we start, or do we need like another couple minutes?
I say we
So
start.
I would, yeah.
We have a half hour to roll through this.
Exactly. All right, so we have a joint City Council Planning Commission work session that's starting, reviewing the final draft goals and policies for strategic and collective governance block. Erica, take it away.
Thank you. So I just want to let you know that Anais Matisse is on the line here, and Joy Chang, Senior Planner. They have been helping us go through this process for this third block of the comprehensive plan. So I'm just going to go through these first couple of slides fairly quick because I know that we've seen them before. Let me. Won't let me page down. Anyway, so we are on the fourth phase of our work plan here. For the past year, we've been developing our draft plan, goals, and policies, and we expect adoption of the plan early next year. What has been the process? I know you've seen this chart many times. Tonight, we're on the Joint Planning Commission and City Council meeting, which is our last meeting that really wraps up each block. For this block, we put out a background report. We held 2 meetings with the CAC and the TAC. We did public engagement activities, and we also did an online survey. I sent out a packet about a week and a half ago that had the meeting summaries. It had the online survey results, so you could see the process that we went through for this block. So strategic and collaborative governance. The proposed topic areas in this theme are urbanization, land use planning and procedures, community health and safety, and natural hazards. And these topic areas relate to specific statewide planning goals. Goal 2, land use planning. Goal 7, natural hazards. Goal 11, public facilities. And Goal 14, urbanization. And we have to address those goals by state law within our comprehensive plan. So that's kind of a crosswalk where we're at. So this is our third theme, strategic and collaborative governance. This was the vision that was developed in 2018. And I'm not going to read it off here. I think we've seen this many times, and it was in your packet. So this vision statement is actually supported by 8 goals for governance, growth management, and community health and safety. So the first 4 goals fall under governance and growth management, and those are the first. Those are the 4 goal statements that you see there. Our next 4 goal statements fall under community health and safety. So we held an open house on March 4th, which was really at the beginning of the COVID-19 pandemic. We had about 15 or 16 participants come out that evening for the presentation. We had About from DLCD, She gave a short presentation about what land use planning is in Oregon and why we do it. And we also had a presentation from Anna East. Originally, we had scheduled Martin Glasser Van Loon from Sarah Architects, but he was out sick that night. So Anna East stepped in and provided his presentation about the history and urban development and our landform analysis for here in Sherwood. And this analysis really looked at the history and how our landforms here in Sherwood really provide the basis for how we have grown over time. The hillsides, our natural features, Highway 99, and the railroad all really contribute to the growth pattern here in Sherwood.
Erica, this is Tim Rosner.
Yes.
Just a question. You mentioned that 14 people showed up for the open house. Once you take out kind of the usual players like the developers and the land groups and stuff, how many would you estimate, of actual just, people, community members outside of that group were there?
I'm going to chime in on that one. I don't recall there being many usual players. There might have been like one from MLG, but there were a lot of people that I didn't really recognize from the usual groups.
That's actually great news, because a lot of times it's those usual folks, right?
Right.
Awesome. Thank you.
So the conversation at the open house really focused on Sherwood's urban growth areas, our future annexation policies, and community health and safety. And so the next 3 slides that I'm going to show you really focus on the questions that we asked at the open house. And these questions were also asked of our CAC and our TAC. So under growth management and urbanizations, we asked, given how Sherwood's urban growth areas have been planned for, are we on the right track for promoting and balancing our need for jobs and housing? And what we have heard is that we really need to ensure that we have the right factual and technical basis to make sound decisions for housing and jobs here in Sherwood. We need to designate land uses in a manner that really accommodate for projected population and employment needs in the future. And then we heard quite a bit about our expansion areas and concept planning and what needs to happen in those concept plans so those plans really conform to not only local and state requirements, but also the needs for Sherwood residents. And that would be, to provide a variety of housing and employment, and to, also really strive for the balance of our housing to job ratio. So the next question was, what new policies should the city consider when reviewing annexation proposals? So what we heard here was really, and you'll see this quite in the following policies, but we wanted to ensure that the proposals really present like a logical direction for growth. And there's a clear timeline for when development happens, and that the economic burden of infrastructure is not like solely on the city for any improvements that are needed. And we also heard, we should have some flexibility instead of having a one-size-fits-all approach. It was suggested that the development code be updated to provide some different criteria and maybe 2 tracks for annexation, depending on the size of the land area that's proposed to be annexed. And this would ensure that when the area comes in, it's appropriately scaled for its size and the impacts that it may have to the community. Our last question for growth management and urbanization is, what are the ways in which we can improve health and safety in our communities? So this really, what we heard was we really need to focus on coordination with our emergency response folks here in Sherwood. And we really should elevate the importance of public health and safety through good design and our built environment here in Sherwood. And we'll see that developed here through our policies. So our draft policies and objectives, here we are. So we really set this up as a three-prong approach to this plan theme. We color-coded it for kind of the ease of relating these goals and policies back to the statewide planning goals. So the blue there is urbanization and growth management, the pink is land use planning and procedures, and the green is community health and safety. So through the background report and revisiting and reviewing our current comp plan policies and getting the input from our open house and CAC and TAC members, these policies were developed. We have these 4 policies under the first goal. And I really don't want to spend time wordsmithing this evening, but if you have feedback, on the intent of these policies, or if these policies, are too lengthy or wordy, just let us know, and we can go back to them and give them a refresh. So with this, do you have any questions or any feedback on the 4 policies that we see on this slide?
Anywhere where the word metro is used, I'd like it to be deleted.
We have to be consistent now with our Metro Urban Growth Management Plan.
Is that a legal requirement?
That is a legal requirement that we have to be consistent with all regional and state planning efforts.
I guess my suggestion, you could just make it more generic that we're in compliance with. You could have a one statement that covers all that. But I have a question on policy 3. Mm-hmm. Routinely verify whether the city's supply of developable land is sufficient to meet short and long-term employment. What do we mean by routinely? I mean, typically we like to be very strategic about when we do that.
Yes. And so I know with our EOA and housing needs analysis, both of those documents that we have looked at, we have also talked about, routinely updating those, every 5 years, just to make sure that we have enough need for employment and housing. So those documents really shouldn't be sitting on a shelf for 20 years. We really should be looking at those documents.
I don't want to put a time requirement on how fast or slow we want to interpret routinely.
Right.
For instance, if the laws are such that we don't agree with a bucket of either the employment and the tools used to evaluate housing or the tools to evaluate employment needs, and we know if we go down that path, we'll get a result that we are not wanting, I will be advocating not to update that plan, to delay until hopefully those rules or policies, either at the state or metro evolve.
Yeah, that's kind of where I was going with that word. I was a little bit worried about that, and that's why I used the word strategic around that.
So,
As
this is
necessary.
Julia. Yeah, I think being a little, I mean, because I agree, if we say every 5 years, that might not work. Routinely gives us the flexibility, you know, it's sort of generally every 5 years, but maybe we want to do it in 3 years because there's, you know, something new that we want to take advantage of, or there's been a lot of development and we want to update things sooner, or if there's a reason that we don't need to do it in 5 years and we can go 8 years. I think routinely is vague enough that it gives us some flexibility.
Well, when I agree that we want flexibility. I think in my mind, when I hear the word routinely, it's like something that we're always looking at, and so that's kind of why it jumped out at me.
I know we don't want to wordsmith, but I like as necessary as an alternative.
There you go.
That's good. Duly noted. So we are moving on to the second policy here, which really emphasizes the importance of coordination of our public facilities and services with our agency partners, and to make sure that our land use and transportation plans are incorporated into the comp plan by reference for implementation and consistency. Any thoughts, suggestions?
Thinking.
You have 10 seconds. No, I'm just kidding.
And just as a reminder, this is not the end all of everything. This is, you know, we're asking for feedback, but ultimately you will have another crack at all of this when we go through the adoption process. So don't, I mean, we certainly want to get high, you know, the big things, the red flag things, and make sure that this is as close to ready as it can be, but it's not speak now or forever hold your peace.
For the next cut, if we could get both the 60+ report, but also the PowerPoint summary in advance, that would be great, since we didn't get this in advance. Yeah. We just got the 60-page Bible.
I agree.
Yeah, me too.
All right. We can definitely send out the PowerPoint next time beforehand, but all of this information is in your packet.
I understand that.
Yeah, most definitely.
So, to that point.
Well, and this is Tim again, and Julie, I appreciate your comment about we'll get a crack at this. It does set the tone, though, and just kind of going back to Keith's little jibe about Metro, which I kind of agree with. I think there's a lot, there's a lot of times that our partners around us set policies that we like, and sometimes they set policies that we don't like, so making sure that as we look to adopt code and policy to align with that we're doing it in a way that we're maximizing our ability to be Sherwood and not be Portland. Am I making sense there?
Right. We don't have to, we need to know what our neighbors are doing and our other folks are doing, but we do not have to agree with what they're doing.
And in fact, we might try to, even if it's a legal requirement for us to do something, we might work on ways to do that within that legal framework, but still protect what's makes Sherwood great. So that's why I use that word tone.
Mm-hmm.
This kind of sets the tone for that stuff.
Right. Great feedback. So this is our third goal here, and we did add some language that you see right there in red on the slide to this goal. We heard from our technical advisory committee to maybe we should broaden this goal a bit, and so we included this new language to ensure the rate, amount, type, location, and cost of new development will preserve and enhance Sherwood's quality of life so that it is accessible to all community members. And really, the policies below speak to, planning that will accommodate projected population and employment again, and to provide compatible phase transition of development from our urban to suburban feel.
So your policy 3 is challenging. If you turn around and you plan for some sort of buffer on an edge of the city, of a city limit, well, that limit is only there, for the next 10 or 20 years, then the line moves again.
I'll chime in on that. I mean, you're right to a certain extent, but that's the reason for the urban reserves. That those are supposed to be providing 40 to 50 years of growth, and that's really what we're planning for. And so, maybe that needs to be acknowledged, that it's within the context of that.
You can't have the soft edge of your town, and then the town grows. Now you're going to go and do a hard. I mean, if it was just a neighborhood and you're wanting to have a super low density edge after some higher density, closer in, and now you're moving the line a half mile, and then as soon as you cross that old city boundary, you go to high density again, and then transition to low density to that
new line
boundary. Your community is going to look funky, as an example. So I have issues with the wordsmithing of that.
Okay. That's been noted. We'll come back to that one at a future date.
The only town that's going to grow, if you use land types, soil types of that old policy in Washington County, is Sherwood. I mean, the big boys aren't going to tolerate that, and they're going to keep changing the law, but I just need to be aware.
So the fourth policy here is really about annexation and how it needs to be coordinated to be orderly and consistent with our 2040 vision. And that the city, when we consider proposals for annexation, that it meets the criteria listed in this slide.
Erica, I will just make one little comment. E should not be a line. I think there's just a indentation there. It goes, D to F.
Yes.
And another note too, the first 4 criteria are mandated by the state and are already included in your current comprehensive plan. The following last 3, F, G, and H as they stand, are the additional language that's been added to this list.
I'm sorry, what letters were those again?
Starting at F.
Yeah, okay. So
and remember, if you have any comments on these, you can always email them to me as well.
Understand. I'm just curious on the G, the proposed annexation represents a logical direction for the city expansion. Are you saying that these are gating criteria? Because under HB, I can't remember the Senate bill, sorry, that kind of restructured how annexations occur. I mean, are you saying that these should be gating, like we would say, that particular annexation isn't logical, so we're not going to allow it? I mean, trying to understand how this would work.
Yes. I mean, the idea is that we need criteria within our comprehensive plan that we can evaluate annexations so that we are not stuck with being required to approve any annexation that comes to us.
So are you saying that if with this language we could, if an annexation did not meet the criteria of G, let's say, or H, then even if the properties pursued the Senate bill remedy, we could still deny the annexation?
That's my understanding. Josh, you might chime in and confirm, but that's the intent, is that we want to have some criteria within our comprehensive plan that we can evaluate annexations and use that because the criteria basically says that that they have to be consistent with your comprehensive plan. And so if we have standards that annexations have to be consistent with, it gives us more ability to make those decisions.
So the idea is that this language would help us claw back some control that the Senate bill took away.
Right.
Which would be great. I'm just guessing that it's going to have to, there's going to have to be some well-defined, achievable metrics that we're using to say yay or nay. Otherwise, it's going to get challenged in court. And Josh, I'm guessing that this hasn't been challenged yet in other jurisdictions.
Yeah, so Senate Bill 1573 does specifically say that in addition to the criteria listed out in the bill, that the annexation has to be consistent with the other requirements of the city's ordinances. There hasn't been any litigation on that, to my knowledge, but I think the general consensus is that it does have to be objective criteria, as I think Councilor Rosner was suggesting, rather than discretionary, and that it couldn't effectively prohibit annexations.
So we're gauging this a little bit on. Hillsborough loves to brag about South Hillsborough and how it's phased and they're controlling the phases, and then some folks are saying that's what we can do with Sherwood West in the future is control the phases using some sort of yes, undeniable metrics. That even if the metric, Josh, could the metrics literally be that you can't go from phase 1 to phase 2 faster than a certain time frame? Is that?
Yeah, so that's a great question. So there's no concrete answer to that because it hasn't been litigated. Of course, just like with anything else, the more you try to push the envelope, the more likely it is to get litigated. But if you can keep it as objective as possible and tie it back to really logical reasoning, like I think, availability of infrastructure, that sort of thing, you could probably get to that result.
Yeah, and I'm guessing that South Hillsborough, that Hillsborough brags about, they just have the developers in the city happen to agree. I worry about where they don't agree, right?
Yeah, for more continued discussion, but we're not the Wild. Based on this, a Sherwood West would be a Wild West approach if there was demand.
Well, I know it's coming. It's approaching 7. I have about 8 more slides here. I don't know if we want to continue this at a later date or later on tonight, or if.
Council, what's your wishes? Shall we continue to another meeting? Want to do it after we're done with the regular council meeting?
We did that, or finish it now and go to council a few minutes late. How long is it going to take?
Great question. How long are we going to take for 8 slides?
I don't know. Let's 10 minutes. Let's really push through this.
That's asking a lot of.
Don't say it.
But, Council, would you like to just charge ahead? Give it 10 minutes?
I'd just give it 10 minutes. That way staff doesn't have to stick around till after our other meeting.
Yeah, great.
I am in agreement.
Great.
Me too. Chop.
All right. Moving on to Policy 5. Policy 5 really talks about our UGB expansion areas and for these areas to have a complete concept plan when we plan for these areas. And I did hear from Chair Simpson today about this policy. This policy is pretty wordy. It's 3 sentences long. And we talked about shortening this policy up and creating some bullet points. so it would be easier to read and help with the flow.
Hey, the only thing I would add here is you choose the words, is since we just got the grant to do the relook at Sherwood West, that there's a mechanism to say, okay, the current plan is no longer effective until we do that relook.
Yeah, let's. This doesn't specifically speak to that. It's about any UGB expansion area, but yeah, we need to kind of think about how to
incorporate that new work into this comp plan. Yes, I agree.
I mean, could we essentially pass a resolution or ordinance that de-adopts the current Sherwood West concept plan in lieu of a new one?
Sure.
Well,
Outside of the scope of the comprehensive plan, I mean.
Yeah, I mean, it's really, it was not adopted into the comprehensive plan. It was accepted as a guidance, I believe. So I don't know that it's really necessary, but that's a good question topic for us to kind of ponder and get back to you guys on.
Just trying to prevent a race to the annexation. That's all.
There was also a preliminary concept plan as well, which I think is even lesser, there's lesser regulation around it.
True. So this fourth policy is really all about transparency and participation in local land use procedures. It's pretty straightforward.
Yeah, it's fine.
I heard a yes. I heard just a couple yeses, so I am moving on. So policy 4 and 5, again, these are really speaking to clear land use procedures and making sure that we have available information to, to build awareness of development and to build awareness of any natural hazards, and to make sure that we're presenting, all of our land use planning efforts to the public in a variety of ways and formats. It's pretty straightforward again. And we didn't have any edits from the CAC or TAC on these. So I'm going to move ahead here to community health and safety. And as you can see here in red, we did have some edits from the CAC and TAC. And this is, we started this comp plan theme area before COVID occurred. And so now that we're in this new era, we really started thinking more about public health and community preparedness. So as you can see, the first goal here, we did make some changes. So it reads, ensure a high level of public health and community preparedness by providing a well-funded and well-planned police and emergency services for Sherwood residents. And then in the later policies, we included the word health. We really wanted to get that word health in there. And then also we really wanted to emphasize in policy 4 again, the overall community preparedness for the city and what our efforts are.
Just curious, why did we take fire protection out? I know we don't operate the fire department. Walden Valley Fire does that for us, but that's also, we have a relationship. We work with them. We still work with them in terms of standards, code, speed bumps.
We didn't take out fire.
We just took out protection. So it says well-planned police, fire, and emergency services.
Oh, sorry, I missed that.
Yeah, no problem. So moving on to the second goal here, maintain and improve the quality of air, water, and land resources. So we have one policy under this, and it's really to support the president and to support and to preserve our natural resources. Pretty simple. So the third one here, we are encouraging public health and safety through good design practices. Any thoughts, comments? Well, if you have any, you can send them my way. Moving on to the fourth one. Finally, this is the last goal for this theme area. And as you can see here, we did include the word human-caused hazards because we know that not all hazards are just natural hazards. Some are actually human-caused, and we wanted to make sure that we included that as well.
Yep.
All right. So just a little recap about the summary or about the online survey. It went live on March 30th and it ended around the end of April. We had about a little over 60 responses. And as you can see here, the major themes that kind of stuck out of that survey was, to have clear communication and transparency, accessible public engagement and decision-making, are important. And then, making sure, once again, and we hear this, we're going to hear this throughout every single theme, really is to making sure that public services, are robust in our city. They're there and ready as our city grows. And, residents here in Sherwood, they, want to keep preserving and maintaining our natural areas. They feel that's very important.
Erica and all, I just wanted to mention a quick thing about the survey and just placing it in context. You probably are familiar now, every time we come and present this information, we often have a overview of the survey results, and the survey's intent primarily is to put out to the public the draft language for these goals and policies specifically. It's certainly not a robust scientific survey in any manner, but it's a method of getting content out publicly and giving folks an opportunity to review that kind of language before it is worked through with our CAC and our TAC. So really these surveys just kind of help us get a pulse on where people land in terms of their sentiment with regards to this new and or updated policy language. We may use the online survey tool in other parts or areas of our engagement activities, but that's not, the purpose of this survey here was really just to get a pulse on the actual policy language, more than anything.
Yep. So our last slide here. So our next theme is attractive and attainable housing. We are right now gathering all of the information that we need to provide a background report to our CAC and our TAC. And we have been, discussing what our outreach activities are going to be, especially, since we can't meet in large groups and, have an open house and whatnot. So we are talking about, how are we going to tell the story of housing needs here in Sherwood? And we're going to be doing some interviews, I think. And then also we're going to provide some kind of webinar online for folks to go to get more information on housing. And, we've been talking to the Department of Land Conservation and Development and also the Fair Housing Council of Oregon. And so what we would do is, video this webinar, post it on YouTube and direct folks there. We are also having a meeting tomorrow with our project advisory team to talk about our future outreach activities for this theme as well, to get their feedback.
So I have a question. I've never heard of FHCO. Who is that? Who sponsors them? Is that a government agency?
Yeah, so the Fair Housing Council of Oregon is a nonprofit. I can actually send you some information about them and their work. They really tried to address housing needs in Oregon for all communities throughout the state.
Are we, so is DLCD, are they the ones doing the regulatory work around House Bill 2001?
They are.
Okay.
So we're going to be incorporating or, having, conversations about HB 2001 and what that means for Sherwood. That's going to be wrapped up into these conversations.
Okay, and I'm just curious. So the Fair Housing Council, why are we bringing them in? Or is this something every city brings in, or is this something we're just choosing to do? They're just a good source of information. I'm just curious why we're bringing them in.
Yeah, go ahead, Anise.
I can speak a little bit more to the Fair Housing Council of Oregon. They've been a pretty fantastic statewide resource in terms of kind of painting the picture of the housing crisis in Oregon, where it stems from, what it looks like, who it affects. They have also produced many different resources for all different groups of audiences, from elected officials to city staff to community members. They have worked quite closely with many different jurisdictions around the state as cities start developing housing strategies and housing option studies and things like that. So the intent of this webinar, it's essentially like a live town hall, but it would be a presentation from DLCD that would help kind of walk through HB 2001. And then FHCO would really be able to provide a little bit of background around why HB 2001 came into existence. So they ideally would be two presentations that would work in tandem to try to provide kind of the full picture of the state of housing, not only locally within Sherwood and Washington County, but also regionally.
So I'm not interested in a nonprofit coming in. I'd rather be DLCD and city staff.
They are very helpful. The Fair Housing Council is very helpful with the new bill. I work a lot with that council. They have a lot of really good information.
Well, our project advisory team is going to be discussing this more tomorrow night. We are now 14 minutes after 7. I just want to thank you for your time this evening. And if you have any questions or comments, please email me or give me a call.
And thank you for not extending this after the council meeting.
All right. So with that, we are adjourned, and we will start the council meeting in 4 minutes.